G'day guys, ZiggyD here, and in this video I wanted to give you an update for the cold damage over time Occultist build that I originally talked about in the podcast with Ziz Exiled before the start of the league. This was indeed my league starter, and let's just say it's a pretty cool build. This build is quite fast, extremely tanky, and has proven to be super fun, most importantly of all. It's one of the more active builds in Path of Exile I've played in a while. Certainly Path of Exile can devolve into hold down your right mouse button until everything is dead spam. This build is a little bit more interesting than that. We have an instant cast Vortex skill that we can cast while moving and while doing other things, so we're constantly popping that off whenever the good opportunity to do so arises, and Vortex does a ton of cold damage over time in an area around our character, and just that instant cast is just so fantastic. It does have a cooldown. The cooldown gets very short as it levels up, but it's like a 1 second cooldown, and it's something that you can just be spamming quite frequently. Whenever there's enemies on top of you, sometimes you might run over to an enemy to stack up extra damage, which works very well with Occultist. And you might even just use it while using Flame Dash as you're moving through a pack, or you might be using a Quartz Flask and phasing through a pack and drop it on them as you move past. We use a Vile Cold Snap. The actual Vile Cold Snap skill itself is also fantastic fun. It puts a massive swirling vortex of cold damage over time around your character, and with that you can just run through packs, or you can stack it up as a third skill on top of bosses to add even more DoT damage. And then Cold Snap is the other skill that we use, our primary DPS skill, that we can use at range or on top of enemies if we're on top of them. Either way, it's fine. It does initial hit of damage and then puts out an expanding cold damage over time field on the ground that also does quite a bit of damage. And all three of these effects stack: the Vortex, the Vile Cold Snap, and the regular Cold Snap. All stack damage on top of the enemy. On top of that, we also have a ton of effects that make the enemies take more cold damage, either through stripping their resistances or actually making them take more damage. We have something like upwards of 130 cold resistance stripping, and that's thanks to, firstly, Frost Bomb, which lowers their cold resistance by 25%. We also use Malachai's Artifice Ring, my own unique, with a Storm Brand in it, which procs Elemental Equilibrium, making them 50% less resistance to cold damage. We also additionally have a Blasphemy Frostbite Curse, which makes them something like, well, upwards of minus 44 cold resistance, but it depends on the enemy. Some enemies have resistance to curses, mostly bosses. And then we also have the Occultist node Void Beacon, which lowers nearby enemies' cold resistance by another 20%. So that's a huge amount of cold resistance stripping. And that plus stacking 3 very powerful damage over time effects means that we can get out a lot of damage. Most things will die to just either one of our skills, whether it's Vile Cold Snap, Vortex, or Cold Snap, will kill most packs. But some of the tougher enemies, like the new Syndicate encounters and bosses, you can stack up all 3 of these and all of your resistance stripping effects, and that'll just shred them so effectively. One of the things I was worried about when I was initially talking about this build on the podcast was whether it would have good enough single target damage and whether it would be awkward to play, and it turns out it is very smooth to play, having these multiple skills that we can rotate between and having, you know, one of them be instant cast. In addition to having all of this stacking effects, just means that the single target is also very good. So far, as of like getting into red maps, very effective in all aspects of gameplay, both tankiness, clear speed, and actual like single target damage. As I've mentioned a few times, we're also quite tanky. At the moment I have 9,000 energy shield. This will go up a lot more. Right now I'm running somewhat budget gear, which I'll show you guys in a minute. But that's a pretty decent amount of, you know, total effective life for where I'm up to right now. And the main thing that makes us super tanky though is we're both chilling enemies and slowing them by a lot. We're also using the aspect of the spider skill on a ring, which slows them even further. So we've got huge chills. We're freezing things pretty often, and then we're also slowing them with the spider, with the hinder from the aspect of the spider skill. So just heaps of slowing going on. So enemies often can't retaliate, and then when they do, whenever we're taking damage, we just have the ability to have so much sustain on this build. Occultist, you guys probably already know, has that. If your energy shield recovery has started recently, it won't be interrupted for up to 4 seconds. And energy shield recharge is very fast. Currently, I've got something like 5,000 energy shield recharge per second. So if that has triggered, then we're healing 5,000 energy shield per second, and that can't be interrupted. So that's huge by itself. But we also have an instant heal of energy shield through the focus skill that I have on my chest that recovers 24% or up to 25% of energy shield instantly whenever you use that skill. It's on a 12-second cooldown, but you can use that if you take a big burst of damage and want to heal yourself back up. Then we also have some energy shield regen as well, which I'm getting from the Cinder Swallow urn. I got a Veiled mod on that has 3% of life recovered per second, and we can use Zealot's Oath. If you happen to get any other energy or life regen elsewhere, you can also convert that with Zealot's Oath. But another big thing is on that same Cinder Swallow urn is it has 3% of energy shield recovered whenever you kill an enemy. So as you're clearing, if you're taking, huge amounts of incoming damage from a big pack, then you're killing tons of stuff at the same time and you're getting huge amounts of energy shield back. So we have that recharge, we have the actual regen, we have the instant heal, and then we have the healing from the flask, and all that just stacks together. Just having such a big pool of effective life and being able to heal it so quickly just ends up being really, really powerful. In addition to just that, slowing enemies gives you plenty of opportunities to heal. So as I mentioned, we're running pretty budget gear right now. As of getting into red maps, this is what I am running. Mostly budget gear or self-found and crafted gear. My gloves are basically junk. I'm just using them for the resistances. Those cost me a couple of chaos. Some of the cheap early endgame stuff that you can buy to swap into CI, and I did swap into CI in the early level 70s. Occultist with the flat energy shield, in addition to more flat energy shield being on the tree now, makes it really easy to swap into Chaos Inoculation. And I swapped, as I said, in the early 70s, and I had about 7,000 energy shield when I swapped, which is plenty for in the early 70s. I basically wasn't dying from that point onwards. I just leveled Hybrid, and if you check the build link in the description below for Path of Building, I do have a pre-CI and a post-CI tree in there that you can check. But once we swap, we're able to get some pretty budget items that will make swapping pretty effective. Just a couple of the items that you can get early on that are really cheap. Baited Breath has a bit of energy shield on it, and energy shield recharge rate, which is really nice for this build. That's less than a chaos. A Rhyme Gaze with not very good rolls is less than a chaos. With good rolls, a couple chaos. That also has enough energy shield for a swap. Rainbow Stride has a decent amount of energy shield for a pair of boots, as well as 20 ore res. Again, less than a chaos. Malachai's Artifice, which I mentioned earlier, is a few chaos. My shield was also really cheap as well, several chaos. You can craft increased quality on energy shield gear now via those veiled mods from Master Crafting, and that adds a chunk of extra energy shield, so you can get that on most of your bases if you want, and that gives you a decent amount there, so several chaos there. My amulet, I had an amulet that was maybe like 4 or 5 chaos that was a little lower energy shield than this. I just swapped this to change some gear around, and this was maybe like 8 or 10 chaos if I recall correctly. The ring I found myself from doing a syndicate encounter, and it has that aspect of the spider skill, and this ring would be pretty expensive because of the aspect of the spider skill. If you don't yet have that, you can just use a several chaos ring with some energy shield on it, and you're good to go. And getting a base 5-link Varugully. Those were only like 4 chaos when I bought them, but I think 5-link Varugully is because of the tiny crafting has gone up a little bit now, but they'll get cheaper over time, and you can get something like this for just several chaos. I mean, you could even get away with using a Tabula Rasa, honestly. You would just have like 7,000 energy shield instead of 9,000 at this level. But, getting a 400 to 500 energy shield 5-link is not going to be too expensive at all. I might do like something like a bit of a budget gearing look at some things you can get later on. But again, not too expensive at all. Overall, pretty budget gear. Spine of the First Claimant was like 4 chaos when I bought this one. As a tip for you guys, though, they're now 10 chaos because of the popularity of, people seeing that this sort of playstyle is proving to be pretty good. You can actually get a high cold damage multiplier, or you can even craft cold damage multiplier on a high spell cold damage wand or scepter yourself for only a few chaos. These are very competitive with Spine of the Claimant, so don't buy a 10 chaos Spine of the Claimant. That's just silly. Buy something like this for several chaos. Overall, very, very cheap. I think these Cinder Swallows are also pretty cheap too, so if you haven't done your own headquarters run yourself to get one yourself, then just buy one for several chaos, because these are actually quite good. So here's what I'm using. You'll be able to see all this stuff in the Path of Building, so if you just want to check over that and have things be a bit quicker, go for that. As I mentioned, the aspect of the spider skill is very, very nice. This gives a webbing effect that makes enemies take increased damage, up to 15% increased damage taken. So that's very powerful. You just have to stick near enemies, so that's really good for bosses. And it also hinders enemies around you, making them even slower. So aspect of the spider, really nice. Originally, my plan was to run 2 curses, but I'm now running 1 curse and aspect of the spider instead of a second curse. It's a little bit less awkward on mana as well. Reserving another Blasphemy Curse is going to be a little bit more awkward in terms of having enough mana. you would have to get, I mean, all the mana reservation, and then it's still going to be maybe a little bit awkward because you won't have that much open mana unless you're able to stack some extra mana and mana regen. But with just the aspect of the spider, a Discipline, obviously, and a Frostbite Curse with some of the reduced mana reservation, 210 open mana has proven to be very comfortable for me. I am using a mana flask. It's got bleed removal, so I always have access to bleed removal whenever I need it, because you can really spam mana flask quite a bit. So I don't mind using a mana flask, but if you wanted to optimize it a bit so that you were just relying on maybe some mana regen instead, so you could free up a flask slot, you could go ahead and do that. As I mentioned, we're using Stormbrand in Malachi's Artifice, so we can throw these down. Previously, people would use stuff like Orb of Storms for this, but these guys last a bit longer and they tend to jump around and they still hit quite as often. So these are great for applying Elemental Equilibrium. They hit with just lightning damage. If you have some added cold damage to spells somewhere on your build, maybe on like a ring affix or something like that, you probably don't really want that on your gear. But if you do have that, then you can instead put Lightning Golem in Malachi's Artifice and that will work. So as long as there's not an aura adding cold damage to the golem will only hit with lightning damage, and that'll proc Elemental Equilibrium, making the enemies take a lot more cold damage. So that's your good alternative. Otherwise, you could use an Orb of Storms if you want, but I think Stormbrand works really nice. The added benefit of this is it hits pretty often. So at 5.5 crit rate without any extra scaling, it's proccing Elemental Overload all the time on bosses. We have Elemental Overload when we're clearing just fine from using our regular skills, but using that on a boss keeps the overload up more often. In terms of supports, at the moment I'm using Vortex with increased area of effect. I can swap in Concentrated Effect for bosses if I need to. I don't really need to on most bosses. I choose to use Bone Chill on Vortex. I'm still kind of exploring where Bone Chill is best placed, because only the highest, most potent chill effect is going to be applied to the enemy at once. So it's possible things like Cold Snap could be overriding that. So I'm still exploring where is the best place to put Bone Chill, and I'll get back to you guys on that maybe for like a final guide. I'm using Controlled Destruction and Hypothermia on this, and a 6th link could be something like Efficacy, I think. Yeah, probably Efficacy. For my Cold Snap, Vile Cold Snap, I'm using that in Rhyme Gaze, so it's getting Concentrated Effect. I'm also using Increased Area Effect. If this was a white socket, it'd be really easy to swap in something like Hypothermia. We're also using Efficacy and Controlled Destruction in there as well for a nice, tidy 5-link. Other skills, obviously Frostbomb is really good for stripping enemies' resistance. Increased area of effect and increased duration means that you can throw it down and don't have to worry about it too often. And just a cute little setup I'm running here, which is probably not super impactful. Cast on damage taken with an Immortal Call, and an Arctic Breath with Bone Chill, so that we can kind of apply Bone Chill automatically to enemies that attack us at range, as well as chilling them and slowing them down. Most of the time, things are already getting hit by a Vortex and Cold Snap, but it's there, and you could always swap this out with other defensive skills if you want. In terms of leveling, as I said, you'll level kind of like Life and Hybrid up until around, say, 70, and then you'll swap over to Chaos Inoculation. It's really quite simple. I went through the spell damage and just grabbed all of the nearby life nodes while leveling. And then you just respec out of those life nodes and into energy shield nodes instead once you go to swap to Chaos Inoculation. You'll pick up some energy shield nodes that are kind of efficient early on, maybe between like 40 to 70, so that you can have, say, like 3,000 life, 3,000 energy shield while you're hybrid. So things like Essence Surge is nice because of the flat energy shield, and some of the more potent ones like Arcane Focus for 2 points is nice to just get while leveling, so you have a bit of both life and energy shield. But once you swap into CI, that's where it gets really potent. Just check out the tree in there to kind of match what exactly you want to do in terms of the leveling tree, in terms of life if you're a bit unsure. Check out that path of building. In terms of progression, we basically just kind of like go up through here, grab some cold damage, grab the life, any of the life nodes we go past as we go, rush to Elemental Overload, go get the Templar tree, then go fill out the shadow side of things, and at that point you're looking to basically just picking up extra things as you need it, whether they're energy shield or going and getting more cold damage, and by that point you're swapping over to Chaos Inoculation. Super awesome build. I'm stoked with how well this is turning out. I'm going to push it much further. We'll take it to, Shape Guardians and stuff like that, see how the endgame potential works, because at this point I'm still not sure. Like, it's looking like it's going to be really good for that endgame boss killing. As I said, I was unsure about that prior to making the actual character, but now seeing how good the single target stacking is and all of those stacking debuffs we have, I think there's some decent potential here for endgame boss killing. But I'll push it there and we'll experiment and find out just how good it is for that sort of content. Either way, it's an extremely good league starter. You really don't need very good gear to play something like this, and even though it's Chaos Inoculation, Energy Shield build, It's just so easy to get like cheap starter CI gear now, and there's so much support for it on the tree, and especially in Occultist to make CI even like good for budget league starting. So whether you're unhappy with your first build or just want to try something different, hopefully you guys have found this helpful. If you have any questions about the build or suggestions of other things you'd like to see covered, leave them in the comments below. That is it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.